March 18, 2025, Tehran, Iran. The once proud capital of a nation that dreamed of dominating the Middle East now struggles to keep its lights on. This is Iran reaping what it sowed, a bitter harvest of catastrophic miscalculations that have brought it to the brink of total collapse. What you are about to discover isn't just alarming, it will fundamentally change how you understand the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. And make no mistake, when Iran falls, the shock waves will be felt globally. The Islamic Republic of Iran planted the seeds of its own destruction decades ago, and now the harvest is here. A collapse so imminent that even its most loyal defenders are whispering about the unthinkable. We lost. We badly lost. We blew it. These devastating words weren't spoken by some Western analyst or Iranian dissident. They came directly from a high-ranking commander in Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps during a closed-door meeting that was never meant to reach the public. When the elite guardians of the revolution are privately admitting defeat, you know something catastrophic is unfolding. But here's what will truly astonish you. Iran's collapse isn't coming from foreign invasion or military defeat. The Islamic Republic is reaping what it sowed, a perfect storm of consequences for decades of mismanagement, corruption, and catastrophic strategic blunders. It's imploding from within, crumbling under the weight of its own fatal decisions. Think you understand what's happening in Iran? Brace yourself. The truth is far more shocking than anything you've heard before. What Iran is reaping now is far worse than even its harshest critics predicted. Let's start with perhaps the most mind-boggling paradox of Iran's downfall. Imagine sitting on an ocean of energy while your citizens freeze in the dark. That's the absurd reality in Iran today. Across the country, schools, universities, banks, and government offices operate on severely reduced schedules. Some have shut their doors entirely for days at a time. Major highways and shopping malls regularly plunge into darkness without warning. The natural gas deficit, a staggering 260 to 350 million cubic meters daily, has created an energy crisis that would be laughable if it weren't so devastating. Just let that sink in for a moment. Iran possesses the second largest natural gas reserves on the planet, yet its president recently had to make a humiliating public apology while Iran's energy officials were literally begging Iranians to lower their home temperatures by 2 degrees Celsius just to survive the winter. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a catastrophic failure of governance on a scale that defies belief. The domino effect is utterly devastating. Manufacturing output has plummeted by up to 50% as the government frantically shuts down industrial plants to divert energy to homes. By winter's end, economic experts predict Iran will have hemorrhaged tens of billions of dollars, money a sanctions-crippled economy simply cannot afford to lose. But if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear what's happening to Iran's steel industry, the backbone of both its civilian infrastructure and military capabilities. Production has potentially collapsed by half, with some sources reporting even more dramatic declines. Without steel, Iran can't maintain its military equipment, repair its crumbling infrastructure, or sustain its defense industry. Make no mistake, this isn't just an energy crisis. It's a national security meltdown happening in real time. Just when you think it couldn't get worse for the Islamic Republic, the economic numbers reveal a horror story that makes the energy crisis look like a minor inconvenience. Iran's economy isn't just struggling, it's in complete freefall. National currency has crashed to record lows. Private sector confidence has evaporated, and decades of international sanctions have transformed what should be a regional powerhouse into an economic wasteland. How catastrophic is it? According to the Heritage Foundation's 2025 Index of Economic Freedom, Iran languishes at a staggering 169 out of 184 countries, buried among the world's most failed, fractured, and war-ravaged states. In the Middle East and North Africa region, it ranks dead last, 14th out of 14, cementing its place as the region's most economically repressed nation. Foreign direct investment has all but vanished, with just $1.4 billion trickling in during 2023, a ghostly echo of the billions pouring into its more stable neighbors. The picture it paints isn't just bleak, it's suffocating. A nation boxed in by corruption, strangled by government overreach, and isolated by policy watching the world move forward while it sinks deeper into economic isolation and decay. But the most heartbreaking statistic reveals the human toll of this economic apocalypse. More than a third of all Iranians have plunged below the poverty line, while inflation has exceeded a staggering 40% for 5 consecutive years. Picture that, half of your purchasing power vanishing in just half a decade, with no relief in sight. This isn't a recession. This isn't even a depression. This is the complete disintegration of an economic system, leaving millions of ordinary Iranians in despair. You're probably wondering how a nation sitting on some of the world's largest oil reserves could possibly find itself in such dire economic straits. The answer reveals how Iran is reaping what it sowed through perhaps the most disastrous strategic gamble in its history. Between 2018 and 2023, despite crippling sanctions, Iran somehow managed to earn a staggering $253 billion in oil revenues. That's money that could have rebuilt crumbling infrastructure, modernized the energy sector, or provided relief to struggling citizens. But here's where Iran planted the seeds of its own destruction. Instead of investing in its people, the regime made a catastrophic gamble that has spectacularly backfired. Somewhere between $30 to $50 billion, a mind-boggling sum, was funneled into Syria to prop up the Assad regime. Another $20 billion plus went to building proxy forces across the Middle East, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and various Shia militias in Iraq. Nearly a quarter of Iran's precious oil revenue was squandered on geopolitical ventures that have now gone up in smoke. And here's the truly devastating part. With Syria's change of government, Iran's carefully constructed land bridge to its proxies have been completely severed. Now Iran is reaping what it sowed. The billions spent building influence have essentially evaporated overnight. The capability of these proxy groups will slowly wither as Iran can no longer supply them. A strategic catastrophe of historic proportions. Remember when Iran's supreme leader boasted, "Today you can get a car in Tehran and get out in Dahia, Beirut"? The triumphant declaration now rings hollow. The route passes through Sunni-dominated Syria, where the Assad regime recently crumbled. Even if Iran somehow could reach Lebanon, Hezbollah is at its weakest point in a generation after being battered by Israeli operations. But the strategic blunders don't end there. While pouring billions into foreign adventures, Iran allowed its critical infrastructure to decay to dangerous levels. The South Pars North Dome gas field, the world's largest natural gas reserve, shared between Iran and Qatar, tells the story perfectly. Qatar's side of the field thrives with modern extraction technology, while Iran's side languishes with outdated equipment that can't even meet domestic demand. Every year, Iran recklessly wastes nearly 21 billion cubic meters of natural gas through flaring, the unnecessary burning of gas during oil extraction. That's equivalent to 30% of India's entire consumption, literally going up in smoke when it could be powering Iranian homes and factories. This isn't mere incompetence. It's the harvest of decades of failed priorities. Iran is reaping what it sowed through its catastrophic decisions to prioritize foreign adventures over basic domestic needs. But if you thought Iran's current situation was dire, what lies ahead is truly nightmarish. A demographic time bomb that threatens to erase the Islamic Republic from the map entirely. Iran is aging at a pace that demographers find almost impossible to comprehend. According to Iran's own National Population Research Institute, the country's 90.6 million strong population is aging 5 times faster than it's growing, a rate of decline with few parallels in human history. By 2050, 1/3 of all Iranians will be over 60, a 3-fold increase from 2021. But even that alarming statistic doesn't capture the full horror of what's coming. Interior Minister Eskandar Momeni recently issued a warning that sent shockwaves through the government. Iran's population could shrink by more than half over the next 75 years. Let that sink in. The Islamic Republic isn't just facing decline, it's facing potential extinction as a nation. How did a once youthful society reach this terrifying tipping point? Iran's fertility rate has collapsed from 6.4 children per woman to a mere 1.6, far below the 2.1 needed just to maintain population stability. Population growth has crawled to a pitiful 0.6%, down from 1.29% just a decade ago. The regime's increasingly desperate attempts to reverse this trend would be comical if they weren't so tragic. Billboards featuring smiling families proclaim children, the pulse of our lives, while government propaganda campaigns urge Iranians to have more children. The state offers housing loans, financial incentives, and free healthcare to encourage larger families. Even Iran's supreme leader Khomeini has abandoned his previous support for family planning, now calling it a mistake and warning ominously the country needs a young population, and if it suffers the bitter consequences of population aging, there is no cure. But here's what's truly remarkable. Despite the propaganda and incentives, Iranians are overwhelmingly rejecting the regime's natalist agenda. The heartbreaking reason? Most simply don't see a future worth bringing children into. As one 39-year-old woman from Tehran put it, raising a child is a huge undertaking, adding that her own experience growing up was marred by the poor educational system and the dire state of the economy. This demographic disaster creates a death spiral that even the most optimistic experts see no way out of. Fewer younger workers mean collapsing economic productivity, which leads to diminishing tax revenues and unbearable strain on pension and healthcare systems, all while the economy is already in freefall. Deputy Health Minister Alireza Raisi painted a picture so bleak it barely seems possible. By 2101, the population could shrink to about 42 million, with nearly half being elderly. He delivered this catastrophic assessment with a chilling conclusion. If the situation persists in 100 years, there will be no country called Iran. But Iran might not have anywhere near 100 years. The seeds of its imminent collapse are already sprouting in the most dangerous place possible, among its core supporters. For the first time in the Islamic Republic's history, terrifying questions are emerging about whether members of the regime's hard base, the ideologically committed supporters who formed the backbone of its security apparatus, will continue to defend the system when the next wave of unrest inevitably erupts. This unprecedented wavering among the regime's most loyal defenders has sent panic through the senior leadership. The parallels to Syria's collapse are impossible to ignore. It was the demoralization and abandonment of Assad's security forces that led to the downfall of the Ba'athist regime. Iran's leadership is watching the same nightmare scenario unfold in slow motion. The last major wave of protest in 2019 revealed just how fragile the regime's support truly is. What began as demonstrations against fuel price increases rapidly transformed into revolutionary calls for the complete dismantling of the Islamic Republic. Protesters torched government buildings, burned images of the supreme leader, and demanded an end to Iran's costly foreign adventures. It was the worst social unrest since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, with hundreds killed and thousands detained. But what truly terrified the regime wasn't the size of the protest, it was who was protesting. Many demonstrators came from working-class neighborhoods and small towns that had traditionally formed the bedrock of regime support. As economic conditions continue to deteriorate beyond the breaking point, with inflation destroying savings and unemployment remaining stubbornly high, even the most ideologically committed supporters are questioning their loyalty to a system that increasingly fails to provide even the most basic necessities. One Revolutionary Guard member, speaking anonymously, delivered a devastating assessment. "We sacrificed everything for the revolution, and what do we have to show for it? We can't even keep the lights on." And if you're wondering whether foreign pressure is playing a role in Iran's impending collapse, what's happening now will leave you shocked. Iran finds itself increasingly isolated on the world stage at precisely the worst possible moment. The Trump administration has taken a two-track approach that has boxed Iran into an impossible corner, dispatching negotiators for nuclear talks while simultaneously positioning B-2 bombers and aircraft carriers in the region as a menacing Plan B. Inside the White House, a battle is raging between those who favor dialogue and those pushing for detonation to end Iran's nuclear threat once and for all. This strategic ambiguity has left Iran's leadership paralyzed with uncertainty, unable to determine which path to take when every option leads to disaster. In March 2025, Foreign Policy published an analysis that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Iran's ideological core, the most devoted supporters of the regime, is showing unmistakable signs of abandoning the system. The article stated plainly what diplomats worldwide are only beginning to grasp. When a regime loses its most devoted followers, collapse becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Iran's situation now parallels the final days of the Soviet Union, a seemingly powerful state that disintegrated with breathtaking speed once its economic contradictions became unsustainable and its ideological foundations crumbled. Just as with the Soviet collapse, few experts are willing to predict exactly when Iran's system will finally break, but the consensus is clear. The question is no longer if, but when, and all signs point to sooner rather than later. The Islamic Republic is caught in a perfect storm of catastrophic proportions: an energy crisis, economic collapse, demographic death spiral, and evaporating legitimacy, all while facing unprecedented international pressure and looming military threats. Each of these challenges alone would overwhelm any government. Together, they form an insurmountable crisis that the Islamic Republic simply cannot survive. But there's one aspect of Iran's impending collapse that few analysts are discussing: the stunning speed with which it could happen. When regimes like Iran's finally break, they don't gradually decline, they suddenly shatter. The most alarming reality? The collapse could come with stunning suddenness, triggered by seemingly minor events that cascade into revolutionary change. When systems are as fundamentally broken as Iran's, even small sparks can ignite an unstoppable conflagration. What we're witnessing isn't just a nation in crisis. It's the final death throes of a revolutionary regime that has exhausted its ideological, economic, and demographic resources. The Islamic Republic isn't merely fragile, it's shattered beyond any hope of repair. But Iran's collapse won't just reshape the Middle East. It will fundamentally alter America's strategic position in the region and potentially transform global energy markets overnight. The situation has grown dramatically more complex with Donald Trump's return to the White House. According to recent Axios reporting from April 2025, the Trump administration is deeply divided over how to handle Iran's impending collapse. One camp, led by Vice President J.D. Vance and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, believes a diplomatic solution is both preferable and possible, arguing for compromise to avoid another costly Middle Eastern conflict that could send oil prices skyrocketing at a sensitive time for the American economy. The opposing faction, which includes Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, remains deeply skeptical that any deal can meaningfully constrain Iran. This group believes Iran is at its weakest point in decades and advocates for maximum pressure, potentially including military strikes on nuclear facilities. Trump himself has sent mixed signals, dispatching negotiators to explore a deal while simultaneously ordering a significant military buildup in the region. According to sources close to the administration, Trump has set a 2-month deadline for negotiations, declaring that without a deal, there will likely be war. This high-stakes diplomatic gambit has created an extraordinary dynamic. Iran's leadership knows the regime is crumbling internally, but remains paralyzed by uncertainty over America's true intentions. But there's an even more terrifying aspect to Iran's collapse that keeps Western intelligence agencies up at night. Behind closed doors, American intelligence agencies are increasingly concerned about what might happen to Iran's nuclear program in the event of a sudden regime collapse. While the official position is that Iran hasn't yet developed nuclear weapons, the country has steadily accumulated highly enriched uranium, enough for several nuclear devices if further enriched, and possesses the technical expertise to potentially weaponize its nuclear material. If Iran's central authority collapses, who controls these materials? This nightmare scenario keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. The prospect of nuclear materials falling into the hands of non-state actors or being sold on the black market to hostile powers. Recent intelligence assessments suggest Iran's nuclear sites may not be as secure as previously thought. According to sources familiar with classified briefings, there have been concerning indications that some scientists at Iran's nuclear facilities have been approached by outside entities offering safe passage and financial incentives in exchange for their expertise. This quiet but potentially catastrophic development has accelerated contingency planning in Washington, with options ranging from covert operations to secure nuclear materials to more drastic military interventions if necessary. And the shockwaves of Iran's collapse won't stay confined to the Middle East. While the United States has reduced its dependence on Middle Eastern oil, Iran's collapse would still trigger economic repercussions that would be felt from Wall Street to Main Street across America. America. Energy analysts project that a sudden collapse of the Iranian regime could temporarily spike global oil prices by 15 to 20% due to market uncertainty and potential regional instability. While the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve could buffer some of this impact, American consumers would still feel the effects at the gas pump. More concerning for American policymakers is the potential domino effect throughout the region. Iran's collapse could destabilize Iraq, where American companies have invested billions in energy infrastructure. The power vacuum could also trigger a scramble for influence among regional powers that threatens key shipping lanes through which nearly 20% of the world's oil passes. Major American companies with interest in the Gulf region are already quietly developing contingency plans. One energy executive, speaking on condition of anonymity, revealed, "We're preparing for scenarios ranging from minor disruptions to catastrophic regional conflict. The stakes for the global economy are enormous. But if we want to understand what's coming, there's a recent precedent that should terrify everyone watching." Iran's deteriorating situation bears striking similarities to Syria's descent into chaos, but with potentially far greater consequences. When the Assad regime began to crumble, it created a power vacuum that drew in multiple foreign powers, spawned terrorist groups, and triggered a refugee crisis that destabilized Europe for years. An Iranian collapse could dwarf the Syrian catastrophe in scale and geopolitical impact. With a population of 90.6 million, more than 4 times Syria's pre-war population, a humanitarian crisis in Iran could send millions of refugees toward Europe and trigger regional sectarian conflicts that make the Syrian civil war look contained by comparison. And now, the internal fragility is colliding with another explosive wildcard, one that could collapse the entire regime in a matter of weeks, not years. Reports leaking out of Tehran suggest something the government has tried desperately to keep quiet. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's health is deteriorating rapidly. Without his authoritarian grip, the fragile web of factions, loyalties, and rival power centers inside Iran could explode into chaos. It gets even worse. U.S. intelligence believes that hardline factions within the IRGC, the very force meant to hold Iran together, may not go quietly. In fact, as the regime begins to buckle, these extremist elements might do something reckless. Very reckless. We're talking about potential last-ditch attacks on U.S. forces in the region, or strikes on critical oil infrastructure in Saudi Arabia or the UAE, acts that could ignite a regional war overnight, and Washington is watching closely. The Pentagon has already ramped up force protection at U.S. bases across the Middle East. Maritime security has been boosted in the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway through which 1 in every 5 barrels of the world's oil flows daily. It's not just about Iran anymore. It's about global energy stability, U.S. national security, and what comes next if the Islamic Republic suddenly falls. So, what does the future look like? None of the scenarios are good. What comes after the Islamic Republic's collapse will profoundly shape the future of American interest in the Middle East for decades to come. While some optimistic analysts envision a peaceful transition to a more moderate government that could reintegrate Iran into the global economy and stabilize regional tensions, others fear a descent into factional conflict that could make Syria's civil war look contained. By comparison, the most concerning scenario involves the fracturing of Iran along ethnic and regional lines, while the Kurdish regions in the northwest, Balak areas in the southeast, and Arab regions in the southwest potentially seeking autonomy or independence. Such an outcome would create new ungoverned spaces where terrorist groups could establish footholds, directly threatening American security interests. The countdown to Iran's collapse has begun. The only remaining questions are when, not if, the Islamic Republic will finally crumble, and whether the transition will plunge the entire region into even greater chaos, or finally bring peace to a nation that has suffered for far too long under a failing system. For Americans watching these developments unfold from afar, the consequences will not remain distant for long. From energy prices to regional stability to the global balance of power, what happens in Iran in the coming months will reverberate through American foreign policy, economic interest, and potentially even homeland security for years to come. If this analysis has opened your eyes to the true scale of Iran's impending collapse and its far-reaching implications, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more unfiltered geopolitical insights. What do you think will happen when, not if, the Islamic Republic finally crumbles? Will the transition be peaceful or violent? Share your predictions in the comments below and let me know which global hotspots you want me to analyze next.